They called her beautiful, as if that was all she was good for. But in 1905 Chicago, that beauty became the most dangerous weapon slavery ever faced. She arrived in the city listed as property, young, quiet, and watched closely, belonging to a man powerful enough to own people, and respected enough that no one questioned how he made his money. To him she was a prize, to the world she was invisible. And that was exactly what made her plan possible. She learned quickly how men like him thought, what they feared, what they wanted, what they bragged about when they believed they were untouchable. She listened at doorways. She read papers she wasn't meant to touch. She memorized names, signatures, debts, and secrets. Every compliment she accepted, every smile she returned, was another step forward. When her master fell in love, the city whispered. When he married her, the nation laughed. No one believed a slave girl could become a wife without being broken by it. No one imagined she had written the contract herself, line by line, using the law that once chained her. Marriage gave her access to bank accounts, property records, legal standing, and something no enslaved person was ever meant to have: credibility. And that's when the disappearances began. Slaves legally sold into freedom, contracts quietly rewritten, work crews dissolved, men and women vanished from ledgers without a sound. By the time authorities noticed, the paper trail led everywhere and nowhere. Her husband defended her, the courts protected her, the system trusted her. By the time the truth surfaced, it was too late. She didn't escape slavery. She married it, outwrote it, and emptied it from the inside. This is the true story of the beautiful slave girl of Chicago who turned love, law, and deception into a weapon and set others free while the world applauded her wedding. The first time Eleanor saw the lake, she thought it must be the ocean. She had never seen so much water in one place, endless blue stretching toward a horizon that seemed to curve with the weight of the sky. It was her third day in Chicago, and Mrs. Hartwell had sent her to the market on Michigan Avenue with a list of provisions and strict instructions to return before noon. Eleanor clutched the basket tighter and allowed herself one more moment of stolen beauty before turning back toward the limestone mansion that was now her prison. She had not always thought of it that way. When the Hartwells had purchased her contract from the employment agency 6 months ago, she had felt something almost like hope. The agency had acquired her debt, money owed for her passage from Poland, for the room and board they'd provided when she arrived with nothing, for the training in domestic service they claimed to have given her. The sum had grown like a living thing, feeding on interest and fabricated charges until it became insurmountable. At 17, Eleanor had already learned that in America you could be enslaved without ever being called a slave. The Hartwells called her their indentured girl, but the word was just a veil over the truth. She worked from before dawn until late into the night. She slept in a windowless room no bigger than a closet. She received no wages, only the promise that her debt was being gradually reduced, though the accounting was kept in Mr. Hartwell's ledgers, and she was never permitted to see it. When she had asked once how much longer she would need to serve, Mrs. Hartwell had looked at her with ice in her pale eyes and said, "Ungrateful girls find their debts have a way of growing." Eleanor had not asked again. The Hartwell house stood on Prairie Avenue, where Chicago's wealthiest families built monuments to their success. 5 stories of pale stone with turrets and bay windows that caught the morning light. It might have been beautiful if Eleanor had been free to admire it. Instead, she saw only the endless floors that needed scrubbing, the ornate moldings that gathered dust, the crystal chandeliers that required careful, terrifying cleaning, while balanced on ladders that swayed beneath her feet. There were 3 other girls in the house, all bound by similar chains of debt. Marie, a French girl with sad eyes who worked in the kitchen. Bridget, an Irish girl assigned to the laundry, her hands already aged by lye and scalding water at 20. And Sophia, an Italian girl who served as lady's maid to Mrs. Hartwell and her daughter Charlotte. They spoke to each other rarely, warned by the housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, that excessive fraternization would result in additional duties. But sometimes, late at night, they whispered their stories in the servants' quarters, trading fragments of hope and despair like precious coins. It was Sophia who first told Eleanor about Thomas Hartwell. "The son," Sophia had whispered one night, her English halting but determined. "He is different from the family. He has a heart, I think. I see him give money to beggars. I see him argue with his father about the workers at the meatpacking plants." Eleanor had been skeptical. In her experience, wealthy men were all the same, convinced of their own benevolence while profiting from the labor of those who had no choice but to serve them. But then she met him. It happened on a wet October morning when she was carrying a breakfast tray up the servants' stairs. The tray was laden with silver coffee service, delicate porcelain, a crystal vase holding a single rose, all the absurd luxuries that Mrs. Hartwell required with her morning meal. Eleanor was concentrating on her footing on the narrow stairs when she rounded the corner and collided directly with someone coming down. The crash was spectacular. Coffee soaked through her dress. Porcelain shattered. The rose landed in a puddle of cream. Eleanor's first thought was of the cost that would be added to her debt. Her second was of the beating Mrs. Pemberton would surely deliver. She dropped to her knees immediately, trying to salvage what could be saved, her hands shaking as she picked up pieces of the broken cup. "Please don't," a male voice said above her. "You'll cut yourself." She looked up and saw him for the first time. Thomas Hartwell was 28 years old, though Eleanor didn't know that yet. What she saw was a tall man with dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead, dressed in a morning suit that probably cost more than her family in Poland had earned in a year. He had grey eyes that held something she hadn't expected, genuine concern. "I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, her accent thick with anxiety. "I will pay for everything. You'll do no such thing," he said firmly. He reached down and, to her astonishment, began helping her pick up the broken pieces. "I wasn't watching where I was going. The fault is entirely mine." Eleanor stared at him, unable to reconcile this behavior with everything she knew about the Hartwell family. "Please, sir, you shouldn't," she began, but he cut her off. "What's your name?" "Eleanor, sir. Eleanor Kowalski." "Well, Eleanor Kowalski, I'm Thomas Hartwell, and I insist that you allow me to take responsibility for my own clumsiness. Go and change your dress before you catch cold. I'll explain to my mother what happened." She wanted to tell him that she had no other dress, that this was one of 2 she owned, and the other was being mended. She wanted to tell him that his mother would never believe him, that she would find a way to blame Eleanor regardless. But she simply nodded and fled down the stairs, her heart pounding with an emotion she couldn't name. That evening, Mrs. Pemberton called her into the housekeeper's office. Eleanor braced herself for punishment, but instead, the older woman handed her a package wrapped in brown paper. "From Mr. Thomas," Mrs. Pemberton said, her expression disapproving. He insisted. Inside was a new dress, simple, practical, but made of good fabric that would wear well. There was also a note in elegant handwriting. "Please accept this with my apologies for the accident. T.H." Eleanor held the dress against her chest, and for the first time since coming to America, allowed herself to cry. After that, she saw Thomas more frequently, though she suspected he was making opportunities to cross her path. He would greet her in the hallways, ask how she was managing, inquire whether she was being treated fairly. His questions made her uncomfortable. How could she answer honestly when his family controlled her fate? But gradually, she began to trust that his interest was sincere. He told her about his work with the settlement houses on the west side, where he volunteered to teach English to immigrants and help them navigate the legal systems that so often trapped them in debt and exploitation. He spoke with passion about labor reform, about the need for laws to protect workers from the predatory practices of employment agencies and contract labor systems. "People don't understand," he said to her one evening when he found her polishing silver in the dining room. "They think because slavery was abolished, because we fought a war over it, that it's gone. But it's just changed its name. Debt bondage, convict leasing, contract labor. It's all slavery by another name." Eleanor had set down the candlestick she was polishing and looked at him directly. "Then why does your family participate in it?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "Because they don't see it, or they choose not to see it. They tell themselves they're providing employment, giving opportunities to people who would otherwise have nothing. They don't count the cost in human dignity and freedom." "And you?" Eleanor asked quietly. "What do you count?" "Everything," he said, "which is why I have to find a way to change it." Over the following months, their conversations deepened. Thomas began to confide in her about his struggles with his father, a railroad magnate who believed that business and sentiment should never mix. He told her about his mother's social ambitions, her determination to see him married to Caroline Blackwood, daughter of another prominent Chicago family. He spoke of feeling trapped in a life that had been designed for him before he was born, expected to take over the family's business interests and perpetuate a system he had come to despise. Eleanor, in turn, told him about her life in Poland, about the poverty that had driven her family to send her to America with dreams of a better future. She described the moment she had realized the employment agency was not the beneficent organization it had seemed, but a trap designed to extract labor from the desperate. She told him about the other girls in the house, about their stories of broken promises and endless servitude. "How much is your debt?" Thomas asked her one evening in early spring. The Rashish were in the library, he reading legal documents about labor reform, she dusting the endless shelves of books that no one in the family besides Thomas ever touched. Eleanor hesitated. "I don't know the exact amount, sir. We are not shown the accounting." His jaw tightened. That's illegal, you know. Even under the contract labor system, you have a right to see the terms of your debt. Many things that happen to girls like me are illegal, Eleanor said softly. That doesn't mean they don't happen. Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "What if there was a way to free you, to free all of you?" Eleanor's heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" "I've been working with lawyers, people who specialize in labor law. There are legal challenges that can be brought against these employment agencies, against the whole system of debt bondage. But it requires money for legal fees, and it requires someone willing to testify about the conditions, the fraudulent accounting. Your family would never allow it," Eleanor interrupted. "If you bring lawyers here, if you expose what happens in this house, they will—" She stopped, afraid to articulate what the Hartwells might do. "I know," Thomas said, "which is why I need to find another way." He did not explain what he meant, and Eleanor did not press him. Hope was a dangerous thing, and she had learned to keep hers carefully contained. But Thomas had not been idle. Over the following weeks, he investigated his family's finances, looking for a way to compensate the employment agency for the debts of Eleanor and the other girls without requiring his father's approval. What he discovered horrified him. The ledgers showed that Eleanor's debt, which should have been reduced by her years of labor, had instead grown. The Hartwells were adding charges for her food, her lodging, the replacement of the coffee service she had broken, even a training fee for teaching her to serve in an upper-class household. At the current rate, she would be indentured for another 15 years. The other girls' situations were similar. Marie's debt had increased when she was blamed for a batch of spoiled meat. Bridget was being charged for the coal to heat the water for laundry. Sophia had been assessed fees for the lady's maid uniform she was required to wear. It was a system designed never to release them, and Thomas realized with growing anger that his parents knew exactly what they were doing. He confronted his father in the study one evening after dinner. "The girls you keep in this house are slaves," Thomas said without preamble. "You're breaking both the spirit and the letter of the law." Edward Hartwell looked up from his newspaper, his expression cold. "I'm running a household with hired help, paid for according to legal contracts. Legal contracts that are fraudulent. You're charging them for their own imprisonment. I'm providing them with room and board, with training in valuable skills. If they're dissatisfied with the arrangement, they're welcome to pay off their debts and leave." "With what money?" Thomas demanded. "You don't pay them wages. How are they supposed to?" "This is not your concern," his father cut him off. "You would do well to focus on your own responsibilities. Caroline Blackwood is waiting for your proposal. Her father is waiting for our business partnership. Stop wasting your time on sentimental causes and act like a Hartwell." Thomas left the study with his hands shaking. That night, he lay awake making calculations, considering possibilities, weighing the cost of different choices. By morning, he had made his decision. He found Eleanor in the morning room, cleaning the windows to catch the spring light. When he asked if he could speak with her privately, she looked frightened, but she followed him to the library and closed the door. "I have a proposal," Thomas said, and then, seeing her expression, quickly clarified. "A business proposal. A solution to the problem we discussed. Eleanor waited, her hands folded in front of her. "If you marry me," Thomas said, "you would become part of this family. My wife's debts would become my responsibility, and I would pay them immediately. You would be free." Eleanor stared at him. "I don't understand. It's the only way I can access enough money to pay off your contract without my father's permission. I have a trust fund from my grandmother that becomes available to me upon marriage. It's substantial enough to cover your debt and the debts of the other girls as well." "You would marry me to free servants?" Eleanor asked, disbelief warring with something else in her voice. "You would give up Caroline Blackwood, give up your family's approval, for us." Thomas stepped closer to her. "I would marry you because you're the most extraordinary person I've ever met, because your courage and dignity in the face of injustice puts my own comfortable principles to shame. Because somewhere over these past months, I've fallen in love with you, though I had no right to and no expectation that you could ever feel the same." He took a breath. "But I would also marry you because it's the right thing to do. Because this system is evil and I have the power to strike against it, to free not just you, but the others who are trapped here. If you agree, we would be married quickly and quietly. I would pay off your debts and the debts of Marie, Bridget, and Sophia. They would be free to leave or to stay on as paid employees. Their choice. You would be my wife-in-law, and in fact, if you're willing. If you're not, we could arrange an annulment after a reasonable time, and you would still be free." Eleanor's mind was reeling. "Your family would never forgive you. I know. Caroline Blackwood would never forgive you. I don't love Caroline Blackwood." "I have nothing to bring to such a marriage," Eleanor said desperately. "No dowry, no social standing. No." "You would bring yourself," Thomas interrupted, "which is everything I want." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth in his grey eyes. This was not pity. This was not charity. This was something real and deep and terrifying in its sincerity. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "So am I," Thomas admitted. "But I'm more afraid of living the rest of my life, knowing I had the power to do something right and chose comfort instead." Eleanor thought of Marie with her sad eyes, of Bridget's aged hands, of Sophia's quiet dignity. She thought of all the other girls in Chicago trapped in similar bondage, and of the power that might come from exposing the system through such a public scandal. A Hartwell marrying a servant girl, paying off the debts of slaves. It would be news that echoed through every drawing room and settlement house in the city. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." They were married 3 days later by a justice of the peace with Marie, Bridget, and Sophia as witnesses. Thomas used his grandmother's trust fund to pay off all 4 girls' debts in full, presenting the employment agency with bank drafts that could not be refused. The agency protested, claiming there were additional charges, but Thomas had brought his lawyer, who calmly informed them that any attempt to levy further fees would result in legal action for fraud and violation of labor laws. When Thomas brought Eleanor home as his wife, the explosion from his parents was spectacular. His mother took to her bed with nervous exhaustion. His father threatened to disinherit him. Caroline Blackwood's father severed all business connections with the Hartwell enterprises, but Thomas had anticipated all of this. He had already secured a position with a law firm that specialized in labor reform. He had found a modest apartment on the north side, where he and Eleanor could live independently. And he had contacted several newspapers about the story of a Chicago socialite who had discovered his family's participation in debt slavery and had married one of the victims to set her free. The scandal was enormous. Newspaper articles exposed the practices of employment agencies across the city. Reform activists used the case as evidence for new labor protection laws. Other families, embarrassed by the publicity, quietly released their indentured servants rather than face similar exposure. Marie, Bridget, and Sophia all chose to leave the Hartwell household. Marie found work as a paid cook in a settlement house. Bridget joined the growing labor movement, becoming an organizer for domestic workers. Sophia saved her wages and eventually brought her family over from Italy, opening a small dressmaking shop. As for Eleanor and Thomas, they built a life together that was both harder and richer than either had expected. Thomas's law practice focused on defending immigrants and workers, often for little or no pay. Eleanor learned to manage their modest household and eventually began working with the settlement houses herself, teaching newly arrived immigrant women about their legal rights and how to avoid the traps that had once ensnared her. They were not wealthy. They were not accepted in the society that had once been Thomas's birthright. But they were free, and they were together, and they were doing work that mattered. 5 years after their marriage, on a cold November evening, Eleanor and Thomas sat in their small parlor while snow fell outside the window. Eleanor was mending one of Thomas's shirts while he reviewed case files for an upcoming trial. The room was warm with lamplight and the quiet comfort of shared purpose. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "Giving up everything you had?" Thomas looked up from his papers and smiled at her. The same smile that had caught her heart in the Hartwell Library all those years ago. "I didn't give up everything," he said. "I gave up things that were never really mine. Money, earned by exploiting people like you, social status built on injustice, a future that would have killed my soul by inches. What I gained was a life worth living and a partner worthy of building it with." He set down his papers and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hand. "You set me free as much as I set you free," he said softly. "Maybe more." Eleanor touched his face gently. "Then we're even," she said. Outside, the snow continued to fall on Chicago, covering the grand mansions of Prairie Avenue and the modest apartments of the North Side alike, making everything clean and new and possible.